The Vatican is under siege. Swiss guards, the Pope's elite soldiers in striped uniforms, lie defeated across the cobblestones. Through the smoke, armored figures charge. Not European knights in steel plate, but warriors in lacquered armor, faces shadowed by tall crested helmets. They carry curved blades, katana, the unmistakable swords of Japan. For a moment, the square of St. Peter's feels like a dream. The Pope himself stands cornered beneath the looming dome, and before his eyes, samurai clash with halberds, sparks flying against Vatican stone. What were warriors from Japan doing on the steps of St. Peter's? That battle never happened. What you just imagined is a dramatized vision. But behind it lies a story built on real embassies, real journeys, and real artifacts, including samurai armor that still rests in the Vatican museums today. So let's step past the smoke and follow the path that actually brought Japan to Rome. Picture the scene again. Smoke drifting across the square, torchlight striking shattered steel. But instead of European armor, flak plates bolted tight, you see layered panels of lacquer laced together with silk cords. The armor flexes with each movement. The helmets rise high with crests, gleaming black with golden trim. A Swiss halberd swings, a katana answers. The sound rings faster, sharper, more hollow, unlike anything European stone had heard before. It feels impossible. Europe and Japan, weren't they separate worlds, oceans apart? Yet here, in your mind's eye, you see the Pope frozen between priests in robes and armored strangers from half the world away. History records no such battle. No samurai ever stormed Rome. What survives instead are traces. Embassies that reached papal courts, letters carried across continents, artifacts preserved under glass. In the Vatican museums today, you can still find a suit of Japanese samurai armor. Its lacquer shines, its cords intact. It was no fantasy prop, it was a gift, carried from Japan to Rome centuries ago. That armor narrows the gap between imagination and fact. It proves contact happened. Oceans stretched wide, but not wide enough to stop the exchange of steel and faith. And if armor could cross seas, what about people? Could warriors or even children have stood where you are now, on the steps of St. Peter's? The answer begins not with soldiers, but with boys. In 1582, 3 powerful Christian warlords in Kyushu, Japan's southern island, sponsored a mission known as the Tensho Embassy. Guided by a Jesuit priest, Alessandro Valignano, 4 teenagers were chosen as envoys. Their names? Ito Mancio, Miguel Chijiwa, Julião Nakora, and Martino Hara. They were just 13 to 15 years old. Their mission? To carry Japan across 3 oceans, the East China Sea, the Indian Ocean, and the Atlantic, and present themselves before the Pope in Rome. These boys weren't random passengers. They had been educated in Jesuit schools, trained in Latin, music, and the arts, to prove Japan's readiness to meet Europe as an equal in faith and diplomacy. Their departure was quiet. From Nagasaki, their ship slid into storm-prone waters. Over 2 years, they passed through Portuguese Macau in China, Goa in India, then across the Atlantic into Lisbon. Imagine the scene in Europe. 4 young Japanese nobles in silk robes, bowing with careful grace beneath cathedrals blackened by centuries of incense and soot. For locals, they looked like envoys from legend. Their purpose was serious. Their daimyo sponsors, Lords Omura Sumitada, Otomo Sorin, and Arima Harunobu, hoped to show Rome that Japan was a worthy partner in faith. The Jesuits guiding them sought papal support for new missionaries. And it worked. They stood before King Philip II of Spain. They knelt before Popes Gregory XIII and Sixtus V. One boy, Ito Mancio, was even knighted in Rome, made a Knight of the Golden Spur. But when they returned to Japan 8 years later, the country had changed. Under Toyotomi Hideyoshi, suspicion of Christianity was rising. One of the boys would later die a martyr. Others drifted from the faith. Even so, their journey proved something powerful. Japan had touched Europe. 4 teenagers had crossed half the globe to kneel before popes and kings. And Europe, for the first time, could no longer deny Japan's presence. And their mission was only the beginning. A generation later, a samurai would follow, armored, baptized, and honored as a Roman noble. How does a samurai, a warrior bound by oath to a Japanese lord, end up with his name written into the civic rolls of Rome? That question leads you to Hasekura Tsunenaga, retainer of the northern warlord Date Masamune and the central figure of the Keicho embassy. In 1613, on Japan's northeastern coast, Date Masamune authorized the construction of something extraordinary, a European-style galleon. It was called the San Juan Bautista. Japanese carpenters, trained in traditional shipbuilding, joined forces with foreign shipwrights brought by the Spanish. The result was a massive vessel, unlike anything seen before in Sendai's harbors. Its hull stretched over 150 feet, its masts rising like towers above the shoreline. To locals watching from the beach, it looked like a floating fortress. Not the curved coastal craft of Japan, but a beast built for oceans. On board were more than 100 men, samurai attendants in lacquered armor, merchants seeking opportunity, seamen hardened by storms, and, crucially, the Franciscan friar Luis Sotelo. He was not only interpreter, but the embassy's guiding spirit, a man convinced that Christianity's survival in Japan depended on powerful friends in Europe. Hasekura's voyage was punishing. From Sendai, the San Juan Bautista cut across the Pacific Ocean. Weeks of nothing but blue horizon, sudden tempests, and disease lurking in the cramped holds. After 2 harrowing months, they made landfall in Acapulco, Mexico, New Spain. Imagine the shock of townspeople in the streets, samurai in silk robes and armor walking among them, not as curiosities, not as exiles, but as official envoys bearing gifts and letters from a powerful Japanese lord. From there, the delegation crossed Mexico by land to Veracruz, then boarded ships bound for Havana, and finally made the dangerous Atlantic crossing into Seville, Spain. It was autumn 1614. Europe had never seen anything like them. In Madrid, Hasekura stood before King Philip III of Spain. He presented letters from Date Masamune, requesting 2 things: open trade between Japan and New Spain, and missionaries to support the fragile Christian communities back home. And then, in a moment that startled his audience, Hasekura converted. In February 1615, in Madrid's royal chapel, he was baptized by the king's chaplain. He took a new name, Felipe Francisco Hasekura. For Spain, this was more than ceremony. A samurai baptized in royal courts was living proof of Japan's Christian commitment. For his companions, it was the clearest sign yet that their mission was sinking deep into Europe's politics. From Spain, the embassy pressed onward. In the south of France, nobles recorded their astonishment at the Japanese envoys who dined in their halls. And then, in September 1615, Hasekura's retinue entered the Eternal City. Picture the moment. Samurai retainers in lacquered armor walking through the streets of Rome, their crested helmets catching the sun, their steps echoing against ancient stone. Crowds gathered in disbelief. For most Romans, Japan was a land heard of only in rumors and Jesuit letters. Now, its warriors stood in their midst. On November 3rd, 1615, Hasekura Tsunenaga stood before Pope Paul V. He wore richly patterned robes, silk embroidered with gold thread. In his hands he carried gilded letters from Date Masamune, one in Latin, one in Japanese. The requests were clear: trade routes, missionaries, and a lasting bond with Rome. The Pope received him warmly. Rome promised support for missionaries. But on the matter of trade, the decision lay with Spain. And Spain hesitated. Back in Japan, news was spreading that Tokugawa Ieyasu had already begun ordering the expulsion of Christian priests. Hasekura's diplomacy was brilliant, but he was rowing against a tide already turning. Even so, Rome offered Hasekura something extraordinary. The Senate of the city voted to grant him the title of Roman citizen and Roman noble. His name was inscribed into civic rolls. Think about that. In a city obsessed with lineage and tradition, a samurai from Sendai was recognized as one of their own. Hasekura's baptismal name, Felipe Francisco, now carried the weight of dual identity: samurai retainer of Date Masamune and Roman noble of the Eternal City. Years later, when Hasekura returned to Japan, he reported to Date Masamune. But the tide had already shifted. The Tokugawa shogunate had outlawed Christianity. Within days of Hasekura's return, churches in Sendai were destroyed, missionaries expelled, and believers forced underground. Spain declined trade. The embassy, celebrated across Europe, achieved almost nothing at home. Worse still, Hasekura's family suffered. His descendants were stripped of rank, his legacy stained by his Christian ties. For generations, even his name was shadowed by suspicion. And yet, in Europe, his image endures. In archives, you can still find his Roman noble title. In statues, paintings, and even the surnames of Spanish towns, the embassy lives on. So what do we make of Hasekura Tsunenaga? A loyal samurai baptized in Madrid? A Japanese envoy kneeling before the Pope? A warrior who carried his sword and his oath across 3 oceans, only to return to a homeland that no longer wanted what he had brought? For a moment in history, one man held loyalty to both Sendai and Rome. And in that moment, the impossible happened. A samurai became a Roman noble. Why would Bushidō, a warrior's code from Japan, matter at the gates of the Vatican? At its core, Bushidō demanded loyalty beyond life. To serve a lord was to serve unto death. Betrayal meant shame. Obedience meant honor eternal. Jesuit missionaries saw this not as opposition, but opportunity. They preached loyalty to Christ in terms samurai already knew: duty, service, sacrifice. To a convert, the Pope could feel like another kind of lord. And it wasn't only theory. Date Masamune built a church in Sendai, sent his retainer Hasekura Tsunenaga across 3 oceans, and wrote letters to the Pope asking for missionaries. Those envoys carried not just scrolls, but swords, samurai retainers marching beside priests. Stand today in the Vatican museums, and you'll still see samurai armor given as a gift, lacquered, corded, edged with gold, proof that Bushidō once stretched far enough to touch Rome itself. But that bridge was fragile. Even as envoys stood in basilicas, Japan's rulers at home were preparing to sever it. By 1614, the Tokugawa shogunate turned. Christianity was outlawed, missionaries expelled, churches burned, converts forced to trample holy images. When Hasekura Tsunenaga arrived in Spain and Rome, Europe already knew. Japan was purging the very faith his mission defended. His baptism in Madrid, his Roman honors, even his title of noble, none of it mattered on his return. His family was stripped, descendants persecuted. The dream of alliance collapsed into silence. By the 1630s, Sakoku, the closed country, sealed Japan off for 2 centuries. Foreigners restricted to Nagasaki, Japanese forbidden to leave. The human toll was brutal. One of the Tensho boys, Julião Nakaura, was executed in 1633 for refusing to renounce Christ. Others vanished in persecution. Yet abroad, echoes survived. A statue of Hasekura in Havana, families named Japón in Spain, and samurai armor gleaming still under Vatican glass. No record shows samurai storming the Vatican to defend the Pope, but the embassies, the Tensho boys, Hasekura's baptism in Madrid, the Roman citizenship recorded in the Senate, and the armor still displayed in the Vatican, all make the image less fantasy than a grounded what if. We began with an imagined siege, a vision of katana flashing in St. Peter's Square. That never happened. But what did happen is stranger still. Teenagers crossing 3 oceans to kneel before popes. A samurai recognized as a Roman noble. Artifacts from Japan resting in the Vatican's halls. The truth is this: Japan and Europe were never as separate as the maps suggest. Their stories touched, their lives intertwined. So what do you think? Legend or plausible history? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more journeys like this, subscribe and step with us into the hidden edges of history.